It is time for the digitizing part of today's class. So we're going to take our hand-drawn artwork and digitize it into a computer file. And remember, you have two options for how you digitize your file. Option one is to scan it in with a scanner, and option two is to photograph it. So first things first, before we get into any of that, your painting should be entirely dry, and the first thing you want to do is use an eraser, and we're going to erase out all of those pencil marks. Remember, if you painted over a pencil mark, like I did right here, you won't be able to erase that since the paint is over it, but you can still erase the pencil marks that are on the paper with no paint over them. And this is where I use my archaeologist brush to brush the pencil marks off the page instead of using my hands. And once you have your pencil marks entirely erased from the page, except for your signature, it's time to go ahead and digitize our artwork. So I'm going to demonstrate first with scanning. So the first thing you want to do for your scanner is make sure that the scanning bed is entirely clean. I usually keep it pretty simple. I use my eyeglasses cleaner and then a microfiber cloth. It's the same thing I clean my computer screen, glasses, everything with. And I spritz the cloth and clean my entire scanner bed. It's always kind of surprising how much dust and grit gets stuck on the scanner bed between scans. And if there's just a few dust particles, I'll pull out my same eraser brush and I'll use this just to move those dust pieces off the scanner bed as well. So when I scan my artwork, as you can tell, the paper is actually bigger than the scanner bed itself. So I usually wind up scanning in a few separate pieces and then fusing them together in Photoshop. But for today's class, we will still be scanning in separate pieces because my paper is huge, but we're not going to be necessarily fusing them together the way that I do with my standalone paintings that need to be kept as one entire image. For this project, I don't necessarily need to make sure that that scan is fused together absolutely perfectly because the idea of painting these separate elements is we'll be pulling them apart, rearranging them anyway. So again, that fuse isn't really necessary. But if you want to learn how to perfectly merge two or more scans together in Photoshop, check out my other Skillshare class, Digitize Your Art to Sell Online. Prep your paintings for print on demand. So the way I'm going to scan these is I want to make sure that all of my elements are perfectly encapsulated in each scan. So that's probably going to mean a scan of these elements plus my signature, a scan of the medium elements, and then a scan of the detail elements. There's a chance I might be able to fit both of these on one scan. We'll just see what happens. But the important thing is I don't want to cut any elements out of my scan and have to fuse them together. It's just extra work. I'd rather just perfectly capture them in the scan to save a step later on. So in my case, I'm going to start by placing my paper on the scanner bed like this. I'll close my scanner bed, do one scan. And pro tip, if you're scanning in multiple sections of your paper, make sure that you keep it at the same orientation for each scan. Don't flip it around like this. Keep it consistent for all of your scans. And the reason this is important is because when that scanning light scans over your paper, it'll cast a very subtle shadow over the bumpiness and toothiness of your paper. And so if you were to flip it and use both of those scans, the shadow, the paper texture would be a little bit different and it would just be minorly inconsistent. So a quick workaround for that is just to make sure that you're scanning in at the same angle for both of your scans. Scanning generally takes a couple minutes, so what I'll do is I'll hold my hands gently over the lid so that that paper is very flush to the scanning bed. Don't press down too hard or else that scan is going to get compromised and you'll get these weird streaks in your digital file. And when it comes to saving your file, you generally have a few options here. TIFFs will give you better quality than JPEGs, but I generally save my scans as JPEGs anyway because the file size is massively smaller. And even though TIFFs have slightly better quality, I'm scanning in at these massive resolutions, so that slight difference in quality isn't going to make a big difference for me. And just a side note here, your scan setting dialog box probably doesn't look exactly like mine. Every scanner has a slightly different dialog box, so just look for comparable settings to the ones I'm inputting here. I want my scan settings to be on photograph, the mode should be photo, never document, and I scan in at a pretty high resolution. I'm going to go with 1200 dpi for this scan. And I'll use my thumbnail box to establish each part of the scan that I'm doing, so it looks like I can grab my hero and my medium all in one scan. I'll go ahead and press scan, capture that, and then do the same thing with my detail elements. Okay, so now that you have the basics of scanning, I'm going to give you my best tips for photographing your artwork. Remember, photographing your artwork is option 2 if you don't have a scanner. Scanning is my preferred method, but photographing can be a close second. If you're planning on scanning, this won't apply to you, so you can just go ahead and skip to the next lesson. Alright, so photographing tips. To photograph your elements, you can either use a camera or your phone. I want to make this class as accessible as possible for you, so if you don't have a fancy DSLR camera, you can always just use your phone. So whether you're scanning in your work or photographing it with a camera or a phone, the scanning, digitizing, cleaning up, everything we do in Photoshop is going to be the exact same. So if you're just going to be using your phone to digitize your artwork and maybe later on you decide to upgrade to a scanner, all of the steps you learn in this class are going to be the exact same. It doesn't really matter how your stuff gets digitized. What we do in Photoshop is universal either way. So here's what you need to know to create a quality photograph. 1. Lighting is the most important thing here. Natural light will absolutely give you the best results. Do not use flash. Cloudy days are better than sunny days, which sounds counterintuitive, but when the sunlight is filtered through the clouds, it'll give a more even-toned appearance to your artwork. Direct sunlight can cause these really harsh shadows and highlights. And when it comes to lighting, the thing you want to avoid at all cost is having your artwork backlit. That means that the sun is behind your paper. If that's the case, your artwork will look super dark in the photograph and the colors won't be accurate at all. Here's an example of a backlit photograph, and here's an example of a perfectly lit photograph. 2. Positioning. You want to capture a perfectly straight-on shot of your artwork. So make sure that the lens is angled at the exact center of your artwork. You don't want to be at an angle like here or here. Perfectly above is the way to go. And the best way to do this is to place your painting on a table and then shoot from above, just like this. Don't forget to tap the center of your artwork to set the focus. 3. Never use the camera zoom. For crisper results, hold your camera as close as you can without having your artwork get cropped out of the frame. And 4, check your phone or camera to make sure that the photo it's capturing is going to be at the highest quality file size. Alright, so these are all the basics for photographing your artwork. So as you can see, photographing is a little bit more complicated than just simply scanning, but photographing is definitely a viable option if you need it. Alright, so once you have your scans or photos saved to your computer, the next step is opening up Photoshop.